All right, so today we are here to talk about the art of leading a team, specifically a tool that we use called the 2x2 Prioritization Matrix. I'm particularly excited about sharing this content because I often get calls from customers saying, you know, Jay, I think we need to be a little bit more agile. And I think they think they're talking about the 73-word manifesto and the 12 principles, the big A agile that's trademarked, not literally agile as in the Webster definition that I think most CEOs mean. Like they want their teams to be comfortable pivoting, to take advantage of market conditions, to be flexible, to be elastic, etc. Or I'll get a call and they're like, hey, we think that we should adopt DevOps. And all of these things, right? Enterprise project management, Agile, Scrum, DevOps, scaled Agile framework. These are all sophisticated frameworks that work great when you already have a disciplined team. So what I usually find when I go into these organizations is that first and foremost, I got the call because they don't feel like they're getting the results that they think they need in the time frame that they need them. And I know, because I've been doing this for way too long, that it's not that they don't have Scrum, or it's not that they don't have DevOps, or it's not that they don't have a scaled Agile framework. What they're missing is discipline, transparency, trust, and accountability. And usually it's because the leader is expecting the team members to be super disciplined about the way that they capture their work, about the way that they prioritize their work, about the way that they execute their work. But when I look at how the leader is preparing to prioritize their work and execute their work, they're basically winging it. And I think that comes from our cowboy culture, in that we watch all these movies where it just looks like these great leaders are able to, in the moment, muster this incredible speech, and then the team rallies and begins to execute. Except if we're to look at our experience in real life, not in the movies, anecdotally, very rarely does a leader ever pull the team together, give the vision, have the team go, amazing, yes, we're on board. I mean, that part might happen, right? The leader gives the vision. The team says, oh my God, we're on board, we're gonna do it. And then they're actually executing according to this vision the next week and the week after. Meaning the expectation is they will be executing against this vision the next week and the week after, and almost flawlessly, but realistically, they forgot about it between the speech and the next week. And so they all show up and they're not even remotely executing according to the vision. The leader gets frustrated, reinforces the vision. 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks go by, and it's just a mess. Realistically, this should be our expectation about how adoption works. That said, we can improve this by being disciplined, and that's where the 2x2 prioritization matrix comes in. Statistically speaking, 50% of meetings are a waste of time. There are 25 million meetings per day in the US. Middle managers spend 35% of their time. Upper management spends 50% of their time in meetings. It is estimated that more than 37 billion is wasted per year on unproductive meetings. What's interesting about these statistics is meetings are where leaders show up to work with their teams to move the ball down the field at the same time. Meetings are where we lead. We don't lead when we're sitting in our office, when we're thinking, when we're dreaming, when we're answering email, when we're answering Slack. We're not leading. We lead in meetings and we pull the team together, and that's where the team gets to work. That's where the team moves the ball towards the goal as a team. Yet 50% of meetings are a waste of time. Why? Because the leaders of the meetings show up and wing it. So effective leadership has requirements: planning, intentionality, and discipline. I'm sorry, but effective leadership has requirements. So we're going to talk about a 2x2 matrix, not necessarily the 2x2 prioritization matrix that was pulled together by Hike and Sumatra. And essentially what they wanted to figure out was what sort of categories managers and organizations found themselves falling into. They made the assumption going into this that there was a highly productive manager, and that was going to be the model. Essentially, we want all of our managers to be highly productive. So they kind of created that category, but they weren't necessarily sure, without performing research, what highly productive would look like. So they went into a bunch of organizations. What they found was we have 4 categories of managers. We have highly productive, we have the disengaged, we have the procrastinating, and we have the distracted. And what they scored them on, what they found was that they could put them into 2 categories according to this line. So there's the low energy and the high energy managers. And then there's the low focus and attention management and the high focus and attention management managers. So over here in the high productivity category, we've got high focus and high energy. If we cruise this way, we have high focus, but sort of low energy. And then as we come down in the matrix, we've got low focus, low energy, the procrastinating, and then high energy, but low focus, basically spinning in high speed circles. So what we're gonna do really quick is we're gonna unpack these categories, and I want you guys to think about where you might fall at any given time. And what I think you're gonna see is that sometimes you're distracted. Sometimes you're highly productive. What's really important about this matrix is not that this is who you are. Like if you find yourself falling right now into the distracted or the procrastinating category, this isn't who you are as a human being. This is just where you are now. So being aware of our behaviors when we're in these categories allows us to decide whether we want to be highly productive or not. Otherwise, we're just there and we're being unintentional. And again, intentionality is really important to the highly effective leader. So we're going to start with disengaged. High focus, but low energy. These managers exhibit burnout. They're unable to commit to tasks and have strong reservations. Have you ever been in a meeting with that manager where you're like, you're rolling out the vision and they're like, whoa, 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 whoa. Here, and they just want to talk about all the reasons that it can't be done? It's because they're terrified to commit. Because if they commit, then they're going to have to work harder, maybe work more, do more, take on more, and they're already burnt out. Procrastinating, dutifully perform tasks, attend meetings, make phone calls, etc. They're like working, but they're not necessarily focused on creating value. They don't take initiative, and when there's an emergency, they're basically like, please, please pick somebody else. And then here we have the distracted. 40% of managers fall into this category. Well-intentioned, highly energetic. They confuse frenetic motion with constructive action. Under pressure, they feel desperate to be busy. It is true that being busy is a coping mechanism. One of the 4 neurochemicals that our brain produces that make us feel happy is called dopamine. Dopamine is the neurochemical that our brain produces when we do work, when we complete things. The sad part about this is that actually accomplishing something that's meaningful causes our brain to produce dopamine. Doing anything, picking our phones up, checking our phones, attending a meeting, answering a phone call, causes our brain to produce dopamine. So if you're distracted or you're feeling overwhelmed, and you can feel better by causing your brain to produce dopamine, it's a high degree of likelihood you're going to do this by checking email, by checking the Slack, by attending meetings, by checking your phone. Unfortunately, these activities waste time. They steal value. They don't necessarily move the ball down the field. So in order for us to be highly productive, we have to exist here in this category. And what these guys found was only 10% of managers at any given time fall into the highly productive category. Again, this is not nature. This is nurture. It's not who you are. It's just how you are today. And so knowing this first and foremost will allow you to recognize where you're at and then elevate. So clarity of intentions, planned intentional actions, planned intentional actions. That's like sitting down, determining what things you need to do with your team to move the needle, and then sharing that with your team and reinforcing that with your team. Setting productive boundaries, not saying yes to everything. And becoming outcome obsessed. It's not about doing work. It's about defining and then achieving the necessary and expected results, the things that are going to move the needle for your organization. All right, so moving from there, being focused on how can we become highly productive managers or leaders, we're going to move to the 2x2 Prioritization Matrix. Now, I'm sure that you have all seen many 2x2 Prioritization Matrix. In fact, if you have an MBA, you have a tendency to want to put everything in a 2x2 Prioritization Matrix. So I'm going to teach you how to complete the 2x2 Prioritization Matrix, but being an effective leader isn't about creating the matrix as much as it is about working the matrix. I want you to think of this as your plan for your organization, as your plan for your team, as your plan for your portfolio. Creating that plan is important. In fact, it's a critical step, but then every day and every week working that plan is more important, because if you don't work the plan, the time that you spent to develop the plan was useless. However, if you work your plan, you will stay highly focused. You will be intentional. So here we have the value scale and the effort cost scale. We've got high value, low effort, high effort. So over here in the high effort, low value, the do first, drive dailies, these are the things that will create high value for your organization, but don't require a lot of effort. They might though require time as not as much effort, and they might be less costly than things that are more costly. So here, these are our number one priorities that we're going to work in every day. I'm going to explain how this works in a second. Over here, we've got Selectively Invest. So these are high value, but also high effort. So I like to consider these my larger projects. These are things that I'm not going to be completing myself. More likely, I'm going to be engaging with my team or a team to complete. So the Do First Drive dailies, again, these might be like where I, as a leader, am acting as an individual contributor. These are things that I need to be putting constant effort into, constant focus into, where I'm basically baby stepping the ball down the field. Over here, this is definitely where I'm playing coach or project owner or product owner, and I'm leading a team to accomplish something that takes a lot of effort, a lot of time, and is probably more expensive to the organization, which means that it should create, in the end, much more value. So again, high effort, but high value. Over here are my work-ins. So these are low value and low effort. So these are the things that I'm gonna get to last. And then lastly, we've got the ignore or delay category. These are high effort and low value. Not no value, but why would you work on something that's really expensive, is gonna take a lot of time, is gonna be very complex, that's gonna create little value? So these sit in this category until maybe you move something off the board in these other categories, or these become a higher priority, meaning that at some point along the way in the course of doing business, you realize that they will create more value than what they actually cost your organization. There's so many things I love about the 2x2 prioritization matrix. One of those is that it acknowledges human nature. Early in my career, people would say, I have like 5 number one priorities, and in my youthful exuberance, I would say, you can't have 5 number one priorities. You have to pick one number one priority. As I've gotten older, I realize that's not true to life. I have a number one priority at home. I have a number one priority at work. I have a number one priority socially. I have a number one personal project. So in life, we have multiple number one priorities. What's cool about the matrix is it allows us to prioritize and then work those priorities. So for the sake of teaching, I like to teach these as my number one priority. And these would be my number two priority, my number two priority, my number three priority, but that's not necessarily the case. They're just different categories. So these are the things I'm gonna work first, and they're prioritized. So this is my first Do First Drive daily priority, my second Do First Drive daily priority, and my third Do First Drive daily priority. And then over here I have my Selectively Invest, and so this would be my number one Selectively Invest, my number two Selectively Invest. And so I've got these prioritized in each category. I even have my ignore delays prioritized, because that is the order that I would move them up on the board if there were to come a time where they were important enough to move them up on the board. I am going to ignore this side of the 2x2 prioritization matrix. I'm just going to point out that this would be our organization's, at the time, this is an old 2x2 prioritization matrix. At the time, this was our organization's objective. Here were the key results that we were focused on for that year. Here are our enduring core values, the qualities that we hire for, and our guiding principles. And so essentially, once a week, I have an hour-long exercise called a weekly focusing exercise that I'm going to walk all of you through right now. I go through and I update all of these. This does not remain static. Now, these things don't change every day, but they do change. Things get added, they get completed. These change maybe once a year. These have been mildly massaged maybe once a decade. And so every week, once I'm done creating this, I actually take a screenshot of it and I put it as my screen background. So at any given time, if I need to reflect on what our core values are, like I'm making a tough decision, boom, it's right there on my screen. If I'm like, hey, you know, what are my priorities right now? Boom, they're right on my screen. So it's not like a file that I save as and then I ditch. It's something that I'm actively working, like that plan that I talked about, on a regular basis. So with that said, let's pretend for a second like this is my calendar just after I created my 2x2 prioritization matrix. And so the first thing I'm gonna do is I've created my 2x2 prioritization matrix. Like, it's done. I feel really good about it. Everything's prioritized. So I'm gonna open my calendar for next week. And let's laugh about that there's a possibility that my calendar next week actually looks this clean with this much white space. The first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna block my weekly focusing exercise. I'm gonna be like, hey, do I wanna do this on a Thursday? Do I wanna do it on a Friday? And so here I'm just gonna put it at 2 o'clock for an hour. Every Thursday, it reoccurs. And it's really important that I respect the block, because at a minimum, once a week, I need to reconcile my priorities across my 2x2 prioritization matrix, I need to look at my next week and I need to block time to knock these things out. So you can see that they're color coded just like my 2x2 prioritization matrix. I have a couple of other meetings that I call cornerstone meetings. This is my weekly leadership team meeting. We've got a daily stand-ups for our talent acquisition team. And so that's why those are yellow. If I go back here, you don't see any yellow because those are not necessarily things that fit into the 2x2 prioritization matrix, but they are things that are important. So let's call them outside of the 2x2, things that need to get done that aren't necessarily part of the 2x2, but that are fundamental in me running my organization. So here you can see my do first drive dailies are color coded olive green. I've got gray for selectively invest and I've got orange for work in. So now that I've got my cornerstone meetings on the calendar, right? Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back here and I'm going to look at my first do first drive daily. And this is deliver a GSD talk or a workshop for a professional organization weekly. I'm committed to doing at least 40 of these per year. So I'm going to look here on my calendar and I'm going to notice, hey, I've got this smart sheet for project leaders. So I'm going to ask myself in my weekly focusing exercise, which is a planning meeting. And what am I doing? I'm planning my next week. So I'm going to think, okay, what do I need to do to be prepared for this meeting? And I might send somebody in my organization an email to say, hey, do we have everything we need? I might make a phone call, but essentially the Thursday before, I'm going to prepare to be ready to rock the mic for this 6-hour workshop that's on my calendar. I'm teaching that week. I'm teaching our transformational leadership program. I'm going to ask myself what I need to do to be prepared for this meeting, and I'm going to make sure that I'm prepared. Here I've got a coaching session with a client, another coaching session with a client. I've got a meeting where I'm sitting in with a client's team. And this is important because it has a lot to do with team member engagement. It falls into the do first drive daily category, which is why it's green. And once a month, I invite my team to schedule a one-to-one meeting with me if they've got something important to talk about. I don't believe in having scheduled reoccurring one-to-ones because the simple fact is one-to-ones are about serving the needs of your team. And my team doesn't always need me. And wasting a half an hour forcing somebody to make up a reason to talk to me about something seems silly. So I give them back that time. And once a month, I send a Slack notice out to the entire team and I ask them, hey, if anybody wants to have a one-to-one with me this month, if you've got something you want to talk about, even if you just want to have coffee, get on my calendar. So that's what that's about. So then what I do is I go back to my 2x2 and I look here. And as I'd said, GSD talk, I've got the coaching, right? So I made sure that I prepared for the coaching. And here at the time we were establishing marketing goals and lead measures. This was like a 2-week exercise that once completed, moved to the close and opened up space on my do first drive daily. So once I'm prepared to accomplish all of next week's do first drive dailies, I then go to my Selectively Invests. So here we have monetized YouTube channel, podcast, blog, newsletter, GSD. So what I do is I go to my calendar and I'm like, okay, I've got a weekly marketing meeting where we're talking about the content. This was fairly new at the time. And so I thought, what do I need to do to be prepared for this meeting? I think you guys are getting the gist of this, but this weekly focusing exercise is going through all of my number one priorities first, the do first drive dailies, then my Selectively Invests. All right. And if there's still white space, and what I mean by white space, like this, I then will time block for my work ins, these guys right here. Okay. So ultimately, at the end of my weekly focusing exercise, I've thought through where I'm at with all of my priorities in this order. Do first drive dailies first, Selectively Invest second, work ins third. And for the most part, my do first drive dailies, I either have a reoccurring weekly meeting or it's especially something I'm doing with an external organization. I want to make sure that we've connected with them, that we're prepared. Over here for my Selectively Invests, these are projects. So I have at least a half an hour reoccurring meeting or an hour reoccurring meeting with that project team each week to lead these initiatives forward. So like I said, I pulled my 2x2 prioritization matrix together. I went to my calendar. This is kind of what it looked like. I made sure that I put my weekly focusing exercise on first. This is fundamental. I've got my weekly reoccurring leadership team meeting over here. And then I had some Selectively Invests already on here. So I color coded them. You don't have to do this. I did that for the sake of teaching. But I color coded them and made sure that I was prepared. And then I started putting stuff on my calendar as I worked through my do first drive dailies, my Selectively Invest and worked in until I was complete And then this is what my calendar looks like. Now, there's a high degree of likelihood that every single one of you guys watching this video just had an anxiety attack or like a panic attack. Because what you just heard me say is that on Thursdays, I completely fill my calendar for the coming week. And the vast majority of us have executive stakeholders and we have customers. And you're thinking to yourself, what happens when an external stakeholder comes to you in the middle of a week and they need your time? The idea in being this disciplined is it makes handling that super easy. Let's run through a couple of exercises. So let's say I get a call from Jake on my team, and he's got a super cool idea. And he's like, hey, can you make time for me this week? Well, a super cool idea is strategic. It's not going to move the needle for the organization this week. I might say to him, hey man, can this wait until next week? And he might say, no, this is going to move the needle for us right now. We've got to make time, in which case it's a higher priority than if he says, no, it can wait till next week. So instead of disrupting my beautifully planned week, he's just going to look at my calendar, put an hour on my calendar for next week. Let's say one of my executive coaching clients gives me a call and says, listen, I have an emergency. I need to meet this week. Think about it. That's a tactical priority, meaning I need to address it now, as opposed to everything on my 2x2 prioritization matrix is a strategic priority. There's a big difference between my strategic priorities, which is me working on my business, moving the needle for my business or my organization, and my tactical priorities. Those are the things that I have to do to work in the business. We all have these things. And so because this individual is my customer and they have an emergency, I'm going to look at my calendar and I'm going to think to myself, okay, where do I have non-external facing time blocks that are strategic and less important than handling my client's emergency? And so I'll just say, hey, throw me a time from your calendar. And let's say my client says, hey, you know what, next Thursday or this Thursday at 10 a.m., well, this is document like a new product. I'm going to say no problem, and I'm going to move it. It makes it real easy to determining, is this a higher priority than what I already have on my calendar? Because I can look at my calendar and all my number one priorities are already on my calendar. My client throws me a time. I look in that time slot. As it happens, I can absolutely move this to the following week. Don't delete it. Don't cancel it. Move it to the following week. Therefore, every Thursday when I go to do my weekly focusing exercise, the spots that are already populated on my calendar are populated with my number one priorities. Now, let's say my client was like, hey, you know what? I can meet at 11 a.m. on Wednesday. Well, I've already got a coaching session with a client externally facing, so I'm going to say I'm not available at that time. What else do you have? No matter how full my calendar is, there's a high degree of likelihood that I'll be able to find a time slot for something that is a tactical priority, especially if it's an emergency. And again, this is really important. Instead of deleting or canceling the thing that I have in that time block, I'm just going to move it to the next week so it remains on my calendar. So I often get asked the question, like when somebody goes into your calendar and tries to schedule a meeting with you, Jay, and they use that scheduling assistant and they look at this week and it's completely full, but it's an emergency. What do you do about that? The beauty in this is they have to reach out to me. And if it's not really an emergency, they won't. They'll look at the next week and they'll be like, oh, there's free time the next week, and they'll take that time. If they truly believe it's an emergency, they have to reach out to me, and then we together get to weigh whether it's an emergency. When you leave your calendar open, people will take that time. And they will take that time for things that may be important or may not be important, but you are not in control. And therefore, you are not leading. You are just going from meeting to meeting to meeting to meeting, whether it's important or not. Have you ever attended a meeting and afterward you were like, I will never get that 6 minutes back? Yeah, because 50% of meetings are a waste of time. When you take the time each week to block your calendar and put all your number one priorities on your calendar, you will always be working on your number one priorities. It makes it super simple to determine whether the incoming is important enough to move something in a given week out to the next week, or whether it can wait until the following week. And lastly, when people are trying to grab time on your calendar, they can't without having a conversation. And what that does is it puts them in a position to decide, is this important enough to call me and ask for the time, or can it wait until next week? This actually makes it more efficient for them. Have you ever scheduled a meeting with an executive and literally 5 minutes before the meeting, they just canceled on you? Here's why. Because instead of them being proactive and planning what their week is gonna look like, they were heading up to that meeting and they realized, based on the agenda, that meeting was not high value for them. And so they canceled it to do something else. And now there you are last minute scrambling to figure out, like, how do I get back on their calendar? What's important? So when you have a leader that's not disciplined It's really hard to work with them. It's really hard to plan with them. More importantly, it's really hard to team with them. So by going through each week, my 2x2 prioritization matrix, planning and putting all my number one priorities on my calendar, it actually creates a precedence that allows my team and I to work much more collaboratively. They can look at my calendar, and when it's blocked, they can reach out, we can have a discussion. Therefore, when I'm coming up to that meeting block, whether it be this week or next week, I know why I agreed to the meeting, and I'm not gonna cancel it and leave you scrambling trying to figure out like when we'll actually be able to move the needle on this thing that's important to you. So there's a multitude of great reasons to create a 2x2, but more importantly, to work a 2x2. One is because it makes it easier to deal with the incoming. Two, it forces collaboration with your team members and your customers, which enables you to put the right meetings on the calendar when they need to occur based on your other priorities. Otherwise, it's just chaos. So now let's talk about the GSD cadence. As I'd mentioned here before, I have the weekly focusing exercise, and this is where I go through my 2x2 and I plan my next week. Reoccurring on my next week is my weekly leadership team meeting, which we call the 2x2 meeting, okay? If I look at the agenda of the 2x2 meeting, here's what we do. We show up, we catch up, we go over our meeting rules of engagement to get present to the meeting, we go over our growth scorecard for the business, and then everybody spends 5 minutes providing an update on their 2x2 prioritization matrix to the rest of the team. The reason it is important that we provide an update on what we accomplished last week, as well as what we're going to be working on this week, is so we know each other's availability. I want you guys to think about that for a second. If you guys had no idea that I was doing 12 hours of Rock the Mic last week, you might have had higher expectations for things that you thought were emergencies that I could show up for. But knowing that I had 12 hours of that stuff to do, like, you know, there's things that you probably wouldn't ask me to do. You would just automatically make the assumption that I'm available the next week and not this week, and be efficient and go straight to Colleen, or be efficient and go straight to Jake, right? Like, find the next available human being that could help you move your thing forward. Otherwise, you might spend time trying to get in touch with me. You might Slack me and wait, but I'm in a presentation. You might send me a meeting and wait, but I'm in a presentation. You might leave a voicemail and wait, but I'm in a presentation. And after maybe like half a day or even the next day, you're like, oh, Jay's not calling me back. Who knows what kind of emotions that might foster, right? He's ignoring me. And so you're like, fine, I'll go to Mina, or I'll go to Jake, or I'll go to Andrew, when this might not be the case. Whereas if you know, and this is really important, it's so funny. Everybody takes this responsibility and autonomy thing in such a weird way. Well, I'm responsible for it, so I'll just take care of it. That's not how team members play, right? Like, we send the team out onto the field. Where do we move the ball down the field? Together, on the field. What I want you guys to start imagining is us as a soccer team. Okay? And when you're at the pub doing whatever you're doing, I don't know what you're doing, but here's what I know. It's after 5 o'clock. We don't have a practice scheduled. We don't have anything. I'm not going to bother you, right? But when we're doing our work, right, and I've got to pass the ball, I look and I see who's available to receive the ball, right? Or I need to get clear because, you know I can see that Jim is just, they're on him. And Jim's got to pass the ball because he's never going to make it. He's got to pass the ball. So I got to shake my cover. You guys, anybody that watches soccer knows I don't know anything about soccer, right? I got to shake my cover and I got to get clear so Jim can pass me the ball. Like, we have to, and since we're not a soccer team and we're not actually going to go out on the soccer field, although I think that would be a super fun team event. Anyway, we're not going to go out on the team. We have to know what each other's doing. It's the same reason when we're gonna be out of the office, we send a meeting invite to everybody on the team so everybody knows, hey, we're not in the office, so I don't waste time trying to reach you. I just save the time and I go straight to the individual that can help me. So when you think about our 2x2 meeting, it's where we come together each week and say, here's what I did last week, here's what I'm doing this week. More importantly, I'm gonna ask for the things that I need. I might need an update on something. I might feel like I need to tell you that I'm doing something. And so that's where preparing. So when we get, the one thing that we ask all of our team members to do before this meeting is prepare for the meeting. Weird, right? No, one of the main reasons 50% of meetings are a waste of time is because people, including the leaders of these meetings, show up unprepared. So we not only ask the leader of the meeting to be prepared about the direction that they're driving the organization, but we ask our team members to prepare. The sad thing about that is prepare means something different to everyone. What should we be prepared for? Well, should we be prepared to play soccer or basketball? Should we be prepared to play soccer, basketball, or football, right? We need some guidelines around what we're doing in a meeting to prepare. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Because if I say prepare and Aaron thinks we're playing basketball and Colleen thinks we're playing football and Mina thinks we're playing soccer, are we going to be very efficient in like how we align? No. And so that's why we ask everybody to use this form, the 2x2 meeting update worksheet. This is the worksheet that the leader and all the team members fill out. Yes, fill out. Nobody has to show it to anybody, but it's like a script. It walks you through a thought process on what do I need from this team? What do I need to do in this meeting with my team to move the ball down the field? And everybody's preparing for the same game. We're all playing soccer. We're all playing basketball because we're all using the same criteria to prepare for the meeting. So here we have the 2x2 meeting update sheet. So the first thing we all do is we share. Well, one at a time, everybody gets 5 minutes. So let's say I were to go first, I'd share physical health a 0 to a 5. 0 means terrible, 5 means excellent. My mental health, team and community. This is important information to know how your team members are doing, right? It's personal, it's connecting. And then we go into, and you can see, we have our 2x2 categories. Do first drive daily, selectively invest, work in next 30 days. And so in the case where Colleen this morning realized she had a body of work that wasn't on her 2x2, but she needed to prioritize it against the stuff that was on her 2x2, so she put it on her 2x2. And as it happens, it's a new thing because she put it on her 2x2. So it would, it wasn't on, tax preparation wasn't on her 2x2. She adds it to her 2x2. Last week's accomplishments, maybe she worked on this last week. Okay, so she'd let us know, this is what I did last week. This is what I did, this is what I'm gonna do this week. And this is her opportunity to let us know if she needs anything from any of us to bring this across the finish line. And if no, great. Now we know that this is something that Colleen's working on. And so then she'd move on to her next Do First Drive Daily. And she's gonna ask herself a question. Is there anything that the team needs to know about this Do First Drive Daily? If the answer is no, the next question is gonna be, is there anything I need from them to move this Do First Drive Daily down the field? And if the answer is no, she doesn't need to give us an update. She's not working on it. She doesn't need anything from us, right? And so the idea here isn't to go over every single one of your Do First Drive Dailies, every single one of your Selectively Invests, every single one of your work-ins. The idea is to go through to let us know what you accomplished last week and what you're working on this week from your 2x2 prioritization matrix. And then for yourself, answer these questions. Is this new? And if it is, you want to let us know that you added it and why you're working on it. Because now we know, now we are aware, the entire team, of how you're utilizing your time. And that also allows me, while you're giving your update, if there's something else on your 2x2 prioritization matrix, or even Andrew or any of the other team members that we need, that we think is a higher priority than the thing that you just said you were gonna work on, it allows us to say, hey, I get it that you're working on this, but what about this over here? I think it's a higher priority, and this is how we align as a team. It might work out to where we agree it's a higher priority. It might work out to where I agree maybe it's not, and the thing that you thought was a higher priority is, but this is where we get alignment, right? And by preparing and having a 2x2 and sharing our 2x2 every week, because I can't remember everything that's on everybody's 2x2. I barely can remember what's on my 2x2. And I want you guys to all think of that time you were driving down the road and all of a sudden you realized you had completely forgotten about one of your number one priorities. That feeling in that moment that you're feeling is panic. This is no bueno. You can't forget about all of your number one priorities if you write them down in the 2x2 prioritization matrix. You can't worry about forgetting about written down priorities. And more importantly, if you work the 2x2 prioritization matrix, they're always going to be in front of you. So again, having a 2x2, preparing to give an update according to your 2x2 by asking yourself, what is relevant? What am I working on and what is relevant? Allows us to collaborate as a team and make good decisions as a team. And by noon on Monday, we've aligned, we've prioritized, and we're ready to go win the game. Because we don't compete against anybody, we just play to win. All right. So as you're going through these, you're like, hey, is it new? Do they need to know about it? Accomplishments, what I'm working on this week. Do I need something from anyone else? Am I just informing because I think that they need to know that I'm working on this? It's really important. And then, hey, I've got a pinnacle, like a big next action coming up, and I want to let everybody know that I'm going to need their time. And more importantly, I'm kind of hoping that they'll open their calendars in the meeting and block an hour with me to go over something that I've got coming due that I need them to review with me 2 weeks out. A next action, which might either be a next action or a request. Then I'm going to go through my selectively invests, and I'm only going to talk about the ones that either I have last week's accomplishments that I plan to work on this week. I'm going to figure out, what is it? A new? Is it a request? Is it an inform? Is it a next action? If I don't have anything for a selectively invest, I'm going to skip it. Same with work ins, same with the next 30, 60 days. It's really important for me that I take a minute every week and I think about what I've accomplished. I have a tendency to be a goalpost mover. I set a goal, I reach the goal, I move the goalpost. I reach the goal, I move the goalpost. I don't celebrate. Years ago, before I started doing this and participating in a gratitude exercise, I felt completely unsuccessful. And by years ago, I've been doing this for 22 years. I mean, like 3 years ago. I mean, 10, 15 years in, I'd say to Colleen, like, I don't get it. I don't feel very successful. And she'd say, you're ridiculous, Jay Scott. But the point is, it is very important for us to take a pause and acknowledge what we've accomplished. And it's very important as a team to take a pause and share what it is that we have accomplished. I have a tendency to be very similarly focused with my team. What's the next goal? And we all like to be celebrated. We all like to be appreciated. Everything I've ever read about human nature says appreciations are powerful. So just taking the time to list our accomplishments and share our accomplishments and talk about our accomplishments helps us play much better as a team. If I were to seek input, the challenge or opportunity of most value to me to present would be, this is where I'm thinking in terms of, we have a challenge in the business or an opportunity in the business, and I want to think it through. I want to get feedback from my team. This happens regularly in business across teams. What I find the vast majority of people do, even on executive teams, because they've had no training in respect to how to handle this, is they just show up and they just spew everything that they're thinking about the thing. It's completely unprepared. It confuses people. Questions get asked. It gets shut down. More importantly, the individual hasn't really taken the time to think through how this creates value for the organization. They just feel like it's a good idea. Well, if you haven't taken time to think through how this creates value for your organization, and you bring it to them to spend an hour to determine that it doesn't create value for the organization, how much did that cost? 1 hour of your time to determine that you shouldn't move it forward is way less expensive than 1 hour of 7 people's time, right? So we have a responsibility. So the idea here is we bring it to the group and we say, hey, I have this idea, acknowledging it's not super thought through yet, because we're going to work it with you. You're going to state its urgency. I think it's a 5 in urgency. Really, really important. I think it's a 5 in importance. So a 5 and a 5, that equals 10. So in my meetings, if somebody had something that was a 5 out of 5 and somebody else had something that was like a 3 and a 3, well, 10 and a 6, 10 trumps the 6, we're going to work the 10. They're the one that's going to get the presentation in the next meeting. So if I go back to meeting agenda, right, we give our updates. Those people that have a challenge or an opportunity state them. They get scored. And then when we're all finished, we select next week's presentation, challenge or opportunity presentation. So what happens in this moment, let's say for a second, it's Mina. Mina had a 5 out of 5, or Mina had a 4 out of 4, and nobody else had anything more important. So Mina's 4 out of 4 is going to get selected for next week's presentation. And then I'm going to ask one of the people from my leadership team to coach it. It could even be me. It's interesting the way that we talk about coaching in the leadership communities. You can't flip through an Inc. or a Forbes magazine or a Harvard Business Review article and not find somewhere that great leadership is partially great coaching. But where are your leaders practicing this coaching? Live? Where'd they get trained to coach? Like live? Like when it's important? When there's a human that needs to be lifted up and move forward and they might take exception to your coaching? No, nobody's practicing coaching. What I love about this exercise is I'm going to ask for a coach, And one of my team members is going to spend time coaching one of my other team members every week. So imagine you've got a leadership team of 5 people, you've got a leadership team of 7 people. They've actually spent, and we spend a year doing this once a week, okay? At least one of them acting as a coach to their peer, where they'll have a tendency to show a little bit more grace because they're coaching their peer. They're gonna learn good habits. They're gonna practice coaching. They then will likely be much more masterful when it comes to coaching their team members or even executive stakeholders, which tends to be a little tricky. So walking through that, we have the challenge or opportunity worksheet. So with this agenda item, we figure out who's presenting. It's Mina. I ask for a volunteer to coach. Andrew volunteers to coach, okay? What Andrew and Mina are gonna do is schedule an hour sometime between this meeting and next meeting where Andrew will show up to coach Mina. However, in advance, Mina's gonna take time to think through the challenge or opportunity by filling out this worksheet. She's gonna send the worksheet to Andrew before that time that they scheduled so Andrew can think it through, formulate his questions, be present. Mina then will show up into this coaching session. Mina will go through the worksheet with Andrew. Andrew will ask questions to understand. There's a project management process that I like to cite that people are generally familiar with. The first thing that we do when we get assigned a project is we meet either with the project owner or the product owner. We call it the initial project owner interview. And we say to them, hey, so what are we doing? Tell us about the project. They'll talk for like 10 or 15 minutes. And when they're finished talking at about the 10-minute mark or the 15-minute mark, they have a definition. And I have an understanding of a definition of the project. Well, I might not be the decider on this project. They're deciding what needs to be done. And the subject matter experts are going to decide what needs to be done. But I am the leader. And in order to effectively lead this initiative, to succeed for my project owner and my stakeholders, to lead them successfully to completing the necessary and expected results, I need to understand. So I'm going to start asking questions. I'm going to challenge ideas. I'm going to suggest that they maybe have thought of this or have thought of that based on my experience on other projects, all for the sole purpose of getting really deep and understanding. But what's also happening is I'm taking this individual on a journey. Looks a little like leadership, right? I'm taking this individual on a journey and I'm causing them to think much more deeply about this project than they had before. And so it's an hour-long meeting, like I'd said. At the end of 10 or 15 minutes, I have definition A. By the time we get to 50 minutes in, the project definition has changed, and never just subtly. What they think they need done, why they think it needs to be done, and how they're gonna do it has changed. Again, leadership, we take people, humans, and organizations on a journey, and often that's a journey in thought, how they think about things. This is very similar. Mina thinks through this challenge or opportunity. She takes time to be mindful. She sits down, she thinks it through. Then she sits down with her coach, and her coach, Andrew, asks questions to understand, to explore it with her, to see if she'd thought about this or considered that, or to really sort of unpack how she was feeling about it. And therefore, as Mina presents the first 15 minutes, she sees the challenge or opportunity one way. As Andrew, her coach, asks questions to understand, takes her on a journey, it generally speaking transforms the challenge or opportunity and how Mina might approach it. And more importantly, sometimes this happens and they decide, we're not gonna bring this forward. It's not gonna create as much value as we initially anticipated. This is a success, okay? Because the team isn't gonna have to waste any time trying to move this ball down the field. The other thing that could happen is they become much more deeply committed to how important this is. They also have now the ability, because they've thought it through multiple times, to articulate that why much more clearly to the rest of the team. And so then what Mina would do is she would bring this to our meeting. And like I'd said, once we get through the agenda, select the next presenter, we go through the presentation topic. So Mina would present it. We would take time to ask questions to understand. We would take a few minutes to jot down some experiences that we've had with the topic, and then we experience share. We share back times where we may have encountered something similar and what we would have done. We don't necessarily give advice. Humans have a tendency to be willing to give advice even in situations where they have no experience. If asked to share an experience, you actually have to pull from an experience. And so therefore, if I was saying to Mina, once upon a time, I did this, she knows I have experience. I'm sharing what I did, even if it didn't have a successful outcome. And then I leave it to Mina to pull from that what's meaningful to her in that situation. And then as a team, we can decide, Is this going to land on somebody's do first drive daily? Is this going to land on somebody's selectively invest or even work ins? Or is it going to make it to the ignore delay? We figure out how it's going to get staffed, what its time frame is, and either we're going to move it forward or we're not. But because there was preparation, intentionality, we're very rarely ever talking about things that are meaningless. We're not just giving status. Have you ever been in a status meeting where somebody gives you a status and they're like, what else? What else? What else? You know what that is? 50% of meetings are a waste of time. That's the 2x2 prioritization matrix.
Zoom high five.
Zoom high five, bro.
Good job.